Hello everyone, and welcome back to Queens of the Damned. This week, we're discussing serial killers who share our zodiac signs. We did want to provide a short content warning. The last segment of this episode is extremely graphic and disturbing. If you think it may upset you, please don't listen. We don't want anyone to have a bad experience listening to our show. Otherwise, enjoy the episode.
So, I'm a Scorpio. My birthday's November 20th. So, Scorpios have kind of a negative reputation for being, assholes. And being, really jealous and really vindictive and kind of crazy. And also, only wanting to have sex all the time. The Scorpio's, the most, not to get weird, but Scorpio's, considered, the most sexual sign of the zodiac. So.
It's, intense in every way.
Intense and, intense smarts, intense emotionally, intense physically, intense verbally. They'll give you, a verbal lashing like nobody you've ever met. But there are some positive characteristics of Scorpios. So we're resourceful, brave, passionate, a true friend, intelligent, and quick-witted. Scorpios are notorious for being your friend, and then you fuck them over or you lie to them one time, and that's it. You're done. We don't want to be your friend anymore. And I have to say that that's true. And it is, because, I just don't have time for people's bullshit. So some of our negative traits, we're distrusting, jealous, vindictive, secretive, violent, manipulative, and obsessive. And I'm not violent. Some of those are true. Not all of them are true. But yeah, some of them are probably distrusting. Yeah. Vindictive. Yeah, kind of. Obsessive. Yeah, kind of. But not to an extreme, not to an unhealthy level.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't find that holding a grudge was a trait, but I can hold a grudge forever. So some of Scorpio's likes are being right, which is convenient because I'm never wrong. Truth, honesty, true friends. And then our dislikes are liars, passive people, and stupid people, which I would say that's true. I can't stand it. I can't. Guys, one of my coworkers, when she speaks, she doesn't have very good grammar. It drives me crazy. I just want to, correct her grammar all the time. But, I know that would be an asshole move. So, see, I'm able to hold myself back. Whereas I think some Scorpios cannot hold themselves back. Probably because I'm, right on the cusp of being a Sagittarius. It depends where you look. Sometimes the last day of Scorpio is the 20th, which is my birthday. And then sometimes it goes till the 22nd. The dates aren't always firm. So maybe that's because I'm almost a Sagittarius. But, so my fellow Scorpio serial killer is William Herons, a.k.a. the Lipstick Killer.
Oh.
Yes. So, he's local, sort of. He's from Lincolnwood, Illinois, which is a suburb of Chicago. It's about 5 minutes from where I used to live when I lived up there. He was born November 15th, 1928. His parents were immigrants from Luxembourg, and they were very poor, and his parents argued constantly. So, William began wandering the streets to avoid listening to his parents fight. William began stealing, but it was only for fun and to release tension. He never sold anything he stole. And they know that because at age 13, he was arrested for having a stolen gun. And when the police searched his house, they found, all this other shit that he'd stolen. So they realized that he'd never actually gotten rid of anything. So he admitted to 11 burglaries and was sent to, I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong, the Gibalt School for Wayward Boys. And then he was released a couple of years later, and he was arrested for burglary again. So he was sent to the St. Bede Academy, which was operated by Benedictine monks. So while he was there, his test, and that was kind of like a reform school, I guess they would have called it back then. So while he was there, his test scores and his grades were so high that in 1945, he was encouraged to apply and was then accepted into University of Illinois at Chicago at age 16. He had a dorm in Gates Hall, which is still there, at the university, and he worked 2 jobs to pay for his tuition and board. However, while he was attending classes full-time and working 2 jobs, he still found time to burgle people constantly, like to a compulsive level. So there's obsessive. There's the Scorpio trait. So on June 5th, 1945, 43-year-old Josephine Ross was found dead in her apartment at 4108 North Kenmore Avenue, which at the time was not a nice neighborhood, but it's a pretty nice neighborhood now. It's definitely been gentrified. So she had been stabbed several times, and her dress had been wrapped around her head, like kind of around like her whole face, back of the head area. Dark hairs were found in her hand, which police assumed meant she had put up a fight. No valuables were missing, but the police, their working theory was that Josephine had surprised an intruder and been killed. Her fiancé had an alibi, as did her ex-boyfriends and ex-husbands. I'm not sure how many ex-husbands there were. So the only problem with this case is that because it did take place in the 40s, the articles are not online. So a lot of this stuff was like cited from books, which I was not able to get a hold of in enough time. So I'm not sure how many ex-boyfriends and ex-husbands there were that had to be cleared, but it definitely was husbands with an S. So she had more than one, and she was engaged.
So side note, we should spring for a newspapers.com subscription because you can find almost everything on there. Anyway.
Anyway, so the police received a report from someone else living on the same street of a dark-complexioned man loitering near her apartment that night, but they were unable to locate him. And in the end, they had no suspects. So on December 10th, 1945, so about 6 months later, Frances Brown, aged unknown, it did not say, again, online how old she was, but she was divorced. So we can assume probably 30s, 40s. She was found dead in her apartment at 3941 North Pine Grove Avenue, which is about 10 city blocks from the first victim, which I don't know if you guys know much about cities, but city blocks are shorter than the blocks here.
Yeah.
So you say city blocks, 10 city blocks, that's maybe a 15-minute walk. Whereas here, 10 blocks would probably take you longer than 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So she was found by a cleaning lady who was working in another apartment. And the cleaning lady noticed that there was a radio blaring and Frances's apartment door was ajar. So she went in and checked, and she found Frances with a knife lodged in her neck and a bullet wound in her head. Again, nothing was missing from the apartment. Scrolled on the wall of Frances's apartment in her lipstick was a note that read, "For heaven's sake, catch me. Before I kill more, I cannot control myself." Which obviously is how we get the name the Lipstick Killer. So police found a bloody fingerprint on the door jamb of the front door. A possible witness reported hearing gunshots at 4 a.m., and the night clerk in the lobby said a nervous-looking man of 35 to 40 got off the elevator, fumbled with the street door, and then left. 4 days later, for whatever reason, the Chicago police, in their infinite wisdom, said that they thought that she had been killed by another woman. They didn't elaborate as to why. They just all of a sudden believed that. I have a lot of disdain for the Chicago police, which this case will bring out. So, on January 7th, 1946, 6-year-old Suzanne Degnan was discovered missing from her Edgewater apartment, which is probably about 1 to 2 miles north of the other 2 murders. Police found a ladder outside the girl's bedroom window and a ransom note that said, "Get $20,000 ready and wait for word. Do not notify FBI or police. Bills in 5s and 10s. Burn this for her safety." The Degnan family, obviously they did notify the police, and they received multiple phone calls over the next couple of days from a man demanding the ransom, but he hung up before they could respond, right? He would just say, like, pay the ransom now or something, and then hang up the phone. Then Mayor of Chicago, Edward Kelly, also received a letter saying, "This is to tell you how sorry I am to not get old Degnan instead of his girl. Roosevelt and the OPA made their own laws. Why should I add more?" So this was referencing a nationwide meat packers strike that was going on at the time. Suzanne's father was a senior OPA executive, and at the time, OPA was working against the meat packers. Another executive had armed guards because his family had been threatened, so police initially believed that the kidnapper was a meat packer, right, who was trying to get back at this guy for opposing their strike. A couple of days later, police received an anonymous tip, which I don't know if that was by phone or what, but they received an anonymous tip, which led to the discovery of Suzanne's head in a sewer about a block from her home. They also found her right leg in the same storm drain, her torso in another drain, and her left leg in yet another drain. And then her arms were found a month later in another sewer. Blood was found in the basement of a nearby apartment building. Police were totally stumped. They questioned hundreds of suspects. They gave polygraphs to over 170 different people. And several times they claimed to have caught the killer, only to release them. The police were accused of brutality, which is par for the course for the Chicago police. It's still par for the course. They actually had to pay out a settlement to a guy who they beat the shit out of. And I believe they had to pay him $40,000 to $50,000, which of course in the 40s is an insane I mean, not that that's not a lot of money now, but that's a crazy amount of money. And they also had to pay his wife like $7,000 or $8,000 for her emotional distress from missing her husband. Apparently they were beating suspects left and right to try and get confessions out of them or information out of them. So the police in this time found out that the phone calls about the ransom were a prank by 2 local teenagers who were standing around while the police were doing the initial search of Suzanne's apartment. And these 2 dumbass cops were standing on the street talking about how there was a ransom note and all this stuff. So the teenagers heard it and decided, I guess, to be assholes, horrible assholes, and call these parents. I don't get it. I mean, like, I guess I could be a dick when I was a teen, but, like, come on.
Oh, that's next level.
Too much. Right. That's horrible.
Yeah.
So, on June 26th, 1946, so about a year after the first murder, 17-year-old William was arrested after being caught breaking into an apartment. He was chased by the police, and a police officer dropped 3 clay flower pots on his head, rendering him unconscious, and that's how they finally caught him. It's like a Bugs Bunny cartoon? Yes. Yeah. It's like the Roadrunner, right? I know. However, William was questioned for 6 consecutive days, beaten, unable to eat, and refused the services of a lawyer. He was unable to see his parents for 4 days, even though he was a minor. 2 psychiatrists gave William sodium pentothal, which is aka truth serum, without his or his parents' consent, and then questioned him for 3 hours. On William's 5th day in custody, he was given a lumbar puncture without anesthesia for no reason, other than to cause him immense pain, and then was driven to the police station to take a polygraph with no pain medication given. He failed the polygraph, obviously, as I feel like anybody would have.
Yeah.
Jesus would have failed that polygraph. Like, Gandhi would have failed that polygraph. Like, anybody would have failed it. So there was no evidence linking William to the murders except the fingerprint at the second victim's apartment. It was a 9-point match, which meant that it matched about 70% of the population. That was considered good enough for the Chicago police. It was not considered good enough for the FBI, who required a 12-point match, but CPD doesn't give a shit. So William got assigned attorneys by the court who thought he was guilty. They wouldn't listen to anything that he said. So they pressured him to take a plea deal, which he obviously agreed to take because his attorneys were saying, there's no way you can win. You can't win at trial. Too many people. This case was too sensational. This little girl's been murdered, blah, blah, blah. So when he was writing out his confessions for the plea deal, because obviously that's part of a plea deal, you have to admit everything that you've done. He had to use copies of the Chicago Tribune to fill out the details of the murders in order to make sure that they match the actual crime. There are over 30 inconsistencies in his confession and the actual crimes. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He was the first inmate. I will say it's horrible that he went to prison, obviously. Probably was not guilty. But he's one of those people who kind of thrived in prison, right? Like, he couldn't control himself with the burglar. He was obviously extremely intelligent, but couldn't control himself with the burglaries on the outside. But in prison, can't burgle anybody, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he was the first inmate in Illinois history to earn a bachelor's degree while in prison. He single-handedly set up the educational program at Vienna State Prison and spent his time helping inmates study for their GEDs and research and file their appeals. At one time, the 7th Court of Appeals in Illinois ordered William to be released from prison, but the state legislature passed a resolution barring his release because they said he was this horrible, dangerous criminal who did all of these things. Yeah. But he never stopped seeking clemency, and his supporters never stopped advocating for his release. But he did die in prison February 26th, 2012 at age 83 from complications of diabetes. So, this is a controversial opinion. I guess I'll say it. I mean, I don't want to, offend people, so if you guys think we should cut this, we can. But, I don't care for the police in general. I have to say, I'm not real trusting of the police in general.
Mm.
I'm especially not trusting of the Chicago police. I mean, the things that they were doing to this man, they're still doing today. A few years ago, right after I moved there, so this would be 4 years ago, there was a big story in the Tribune about how they discovered these so-called black sites where Chicago police take people and beat the shit out of them off the record until they confess.
God.
Yes. And this is 2015. And so I don't know if you guys are aware that the Justice Department did come into Chicago and basically was your police department is corrupt and racist and horrible, and you need to institute all of these reforms. So that was one of the things that precipitated the Justice Department coming in, was the discovery of these black sites. There is a group of police officers, I can't remember what dumbass name they gave themselves, but the city, you can look them up, the city has paid, it's something like $15 to $16 million settling claims of police brutality against them. They all still have their jobs.
Ridiculous.
They've never really been reprimanded. Policing in Chicago is not good. It's biased against, obviously, Black people and Latino people. And it's biased against poor people, which William was. So, obviously, the Chicago police didn't give a shit about him. He was just some poor immigrant's kid. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was easy to railroad him. I mean, his parents, who knows how good of English they spoke? Or that was not even grammatically correct. So who knows how good of English I speak? But they, yeah, I mean, who knows how much English they spoke or how well they spoke it? Or they would have had no idea of what his rights under the Constitution were. You know, because this was before, obviously, they had to read you your Miranda rights. But, you know, they would have had no idea that he had the right to an attorney and that kind of thing. I mean, he knew to ask for a lawyer, but when the police said no, he didn't know that he could just stop talking. Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to talk to them.
Well, unless they're beating the shit out of you.
Exactly.
Right.
And giving you lumbar punctures. Which, what the fuck?
Yeah.
And forcibly injecting you with truth serum. Yeah, I mean, you haven't eaten then in days. He probably was, I think I read in one article, I didn't put in my notes, but I'm pretty sure I read in one article that, like, he was having to use, like, a bucket to go to the bathroom. Like, they wouldn't let him leave the room to go to the bathroom.
Oh, yeah. That reminds me of something that happened in the new season of Serial.
Yes.
There was a similar case where what was it? It was in Ohio. The Cleveland police took a guy and put him in a cell, and he had to use a bucket and, like, just held him forever.
Sounds about right.
For, like, 72 hours or something. Yeah.
Sounds about right. I mean, it's awful, and just, I think that this is an example of the state of policing in this country. Overall, I mean, we have really militarized our police and kind of given them free rein. And again, I mean, I even feel like maybe we should cut this and I shouldn't talk about the police because people freak out. And
you're white. It's okay. You're white female.
And I'm not saying that the majority of police are not good cops, because I'm sure that they are. I could believe it. I believe the majority of people really are good people. But they still cover up for the bad cops. They know the bad cops. They know who's doing this kind of stuff, and they do nothing. And that makes you just as bad, in my book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, it's just, oh God, I mean, I have been pulled over by the Chicago police and was terrified because, like, what if they rape me? They've done that before. Jeez. Not to me, obviously, but to other people.
Yeah.
That's not funny. I don't know why I just laughed.
And not just in Chicago. No, it's okay. It's okay. And not just in Chicago. I mean, there was just a story on the news where a cop just got arrested because it turns out he's been pulling over and raping all these women. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's disgusting. And I don't know. And then even when a police officer is held accountable, like Jason Van Dyke, who shot that poor boy 16 times, he got sentenced to 6 years in prison, which is a bullshit sentence. There are people who had an ounce of pot on them who got sentenced to more time in prison than he did.
Yep. And
he murdered somebody in cold blood.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, back to the point. This poor boy was railroaded. He spent, almost 70 years in prison for crimes that he probably did not commit. They basically had no reason to link the little girl's murder to the other two, except that they really wanted to solve it because the public was really upset and outraged.
Yep.
So if we, think maybe this kid did the other two, then let's just, send him up for the little girl too, and then it's taken care of. We don't have to worry about it anymore. But yes, so I would say if I were to match him with some of the traits for my sign, for Scorpio, I would say that he was obsessive. He was obviously obsessed with robbing people. I would say that he was very smart, was very resourceful, when he was in prison. I think he matches some of the traits. I mean, it's so hard to know because I don't think he committed the murders, so It's hard to match him to some of the, worst traits. But yeah, that was my pick. I'm so glad I picked it because I hate the Chicago police and we can leave that in. I really do. They're the worst. And you would be hard pressed to find anyone who lives in Chicago who likes the Chicago police unless they're like related to a Chicago police officer. When I worked at FedEx, when I was at the 24-hour store, if I ever got stuck on the overnight, we would have homeless people that would come in and we weren't allowed to let them stay. Even though I felt horrible kicking them out, but if I got caught letting them stay, I would lose my job, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I would have to call the cops, and I used to hate it because I'd be like, what if they put up a fight? Like, are the cops going to shoot these people who clearly have some kind of mental illness in the middle of my store, like right in front of me, and then it's going to be my fault because I called the cops? Like, it's horrible. It was horrible. It was awful. I used to hate calling the police when I was in Chicago, and I had to call a few times for different things, but not great, folks. Not great. Who's next?
Me.
Now that my rant is done.
It was a good pick. It was a really good pick. Yes.
Thank you.
Well, mine's a little bit similar, but the guy actually did it.
Yay!
So, I am an Aries, and Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. And we're known to be very ambitious, passionate, enthusiastic. We're good leaders. We're persuasive speakers. Basically, everything that looks good on a resume, right? But we can be extremely impatient, confrontational, and controlling. So if we find astrology credible at all, an Aries would actually be a perfect cult leader. Wow, and you're going to see this kind of in this guy.
Oh.
While they can be found, though, there are comparably few well-known Aries serial killers for some reason, compared to other signs. There's this site I follow called Shitty Horoscopes, and it's just this, like, beautiful gothic art with these, like, funny little phrases underneath for your sign. And so here's a couple of the phrases that are associated with Aries. Romancing yourself as possible, narcissistic, and recommended. Also, you are a quiet god and your hunger is cavernous.
Ooh.
That's a good one. You should check out his site. It's really cool. He's got a bunch of badass ones for every single zodiac sign.
What's it called?
It's called Shitty Horoscopes. So I chose Charles Sobrage, the bikini killer, although that has very little to do with what he actually did in the grand scheme of all the bad things he did. He was born April 6, 1944 in Saigon. His mother was Vietnamese and his father was Indian. And Sobrage was considered illegitimate because his parents were not married, which is ridiculous. And it caused him a lot of trauma during his childhood. But the relationship between his parents was filled with tension, and his father eventually just abandoned the family entirely, which usually that's where it ends, right? But this guy, as a little boy, he used to run away at a very young age to try to find his father, and he would find his father. And his father would refuse him every single time. He just didn't want anything to do with him. And he began running away so much that his mother sometimes tied him to a chair to keep him out of trouble. And his mother eventually remarried, and she, over time, had 4 children with this new guy, and they moved around the world. And Charles was pretty much forgotten because he was the oldest, and she had 4 new babies. Finally, the family wound up in Paris, and Sobrage started really early with petty theft and then burglary. I think he was like 19 when he first got arrested. So this resulted in him spending a lot of time in prison. And this is actually where he learned how to effectively manipulate people. He read widely, classics, just every genre. He studied both psychology and law, and he was a particular fan of Nietzsche and Carl Jung. So he learned how to profile people's personalities and would use their weaknesses to take advantage of them the best way he could, and he was a chameleon. He just had this chance while he was in prison to practice what worked and what didn't to get his way. So after a while, he saw a really good opportunity to take advantage of this young guy who would often visit the prison, and his name was Felix Lescon. There's a lot of names in this that I am going to mispronounce. So because he saw that Felix was this naturally kind person who was going to visit prisoners, he got him to press for his early release, and it worked. And when he was released, they became roomies. So this led to more opportunity somehow. I guess this guy was connected with these Parisian socialites, and Sobrage used to mingle with these socialites. He was able to keep like this desirable exterior at parties, but while he was in their homes, he was actually casing the joint to plan to burglarize their homes, and he made a fortune off of doing this. And while he was doing this, he met this woman who he eventually proposed to. And the same night he asked her to marry him, he was arrested for car theft and sent right back to prison. But she remains faithful to him for quite some time after this. There are a lot. He kind of gathered this female crowd around him, kind of like Manson, who would help with his, well, I guess the less extreme of his crimes, but they would help. And the police were really intrigued by this guy who was duping all of these influential people. So while they had him there in prison, they gave him a psych eval. And in the evaluation, they called him a poseur extraordinaire, said he had a tormented nature, and observed that he exploits 100% the weakness of those around him. After he was released, and it didn't really say how long that was, because the crimes he committed were so numerous that it's just impossible to pare it down to like a story. And we don't even know how much he did. So they eventually let him go. He immediately stole his roommate's car, poor Felix, and he went on a road trip through Europe, through the Middle East, and through Asia with his now pregnant wife. And they wound up near what was known as the hippie trail in Afghanistan. And a lot of people would come from all over the world to try to find themselves and like be in nature around that area. So Sobrage would ingratiate himself with these tourists and pretend he studied in their field. Believably, I might add. He could switch. He could say, I'm a psychologist. I'm a historian. I don't even fucking know. Like, he would say it and they would believe it, and he could carry on conversations. This is how smart this guy was. And he would take everything he could from them. He'd drug them, take their passports, take their money. He had a lot of side hustles. He sold gems and stolen cars and all that stuff. I can't even get into how much he did. But because of this, he wound up in prison a lot. And he was really good at escaping from prison. He did some classic stuff. He like dug a hole with spoons at one point. And one of his most famous tricks was pretending he was sick and escaping through the prison hospital. So fast forwarding, his wife eventually ditches him. And he finds himself in Thailand, where he meets another woman named Marie-Andre Leclerc. And she becomes his right-hand woman. She'll assist him in the lesser of his crimes. She doesn't really know about the worst stuff that's about to happen. And this is where it gets really intense. So he began to trick these backpackers who were kind of lost in this really unfamiliar country to stay with him. Kind of like H.H. Holmes in a weird way. And he would convince them that they had food poisoning while he was actually dosing them with strychnine. Strychnine!
Oh
so they thought they had dysentery. And he would say, here's some stomach pills. This will make you feel better, you know? Yeah. So with another man, he began to murder these tourists to take their passports and their money. And because it was just getting too hard to keep them quiet. And he would strangle them, stab them, and burn their bodies. But Sabraj couldn't really hide this forever, as I was saying, and he had these people staying in his house, and they started to get really suspicious. They began to refuse the medication that he was giving them, and some of them saw the passports of his victims. I don't know. I thought he kept them in a safe, but apparently they saw them lying around. Maybe he had so many passports from all these people. And one of the guests went to the British embassy to say, like, hey, I think something's going on here. But she was discredited because she was a hippie.
Oh my God.
I know. Yeah. And apparently this was a source of embarrassment for the British after finding out what he was actually doing. But regardless, all the guests got out of there. They left. And eventually this Dutch detective figures out it was Sabraj who was doing all these murders. And he alerted authorities in Thailand. And here we go with the police again. They arrested him, but they let him go right away. And some people think it's because it was negatively affecting the image of Thailand for tourists. So they didn't want that to happen. But some think he just handed someone $50,000, which I think both are plausible. So now from Thailand, he escapes to India, where he now has 3 female accomplices who would rob the tourists with him. And
how does he keep picking up these women?
It's just his personality. They said when he was in jail, he had letters from all over the world of women who were just like falling in love with him. And when he left prison, he was like this hero and stuff. It was just freaking crazy. So,
how do you spell his last name?
Sabraj, Sobhraj. So, of course, with people like this, though, and this is going to be the Aries in him, his pride gets the better of him. And he decides, okay, ladies.
Rachel's face.
Sorry, he's like not even hot.
No, he isn't.
Wait, now I need to know. How do you spell it?
Sobhraj.
Okay, here's a picture of him when he was young. When he was young, sure, I guess. He looks like somebody's dad.
Oh my God.
Oh my God. Okay, because I thought, like, okay, maybe he's, like, incredibly attractive, and that's how he's picking up these other women. Nope. No. Okay, sorry. Continue. I just had to look.
Well, you would have to after all this. I mean, it's like he's got some magic stuff going on. It's weird. So, like I was saying, this is an Aries trait. Eventually, his pride gets the better of him. And he decides he's going to drug a whole busload of French tourists at once.
God.
But
oh my God.
He gave them all a little bit too much. And they all started collapsing in the hotel like My Chemical Romance song or something. And he was arrested, obviously. And he was supposed to serve 12 years, although he wasn't charged for murder. None of these people died. And on March 16th, 1986, now we're in the 80s. This goes on for a while, by the way. All the way up to today, just so you know. Sabraj ordered food in for the whole jail. What a kind guy. And was able to escape because the food contained 820 sleeping pills. Good night, everyone. He walked right out of the prison. But this gets more bad shit insane.
How did... Wait. If he's in prison, how did he get the sleeping pills in the food?
The money. He bribed...
He just bribed someone to put a bunch of sleeping pills in food?
Yes. He's got people on that. It's like the mafia. He's got people on the inside, on the outside. Just, yes. Okay. So he walks right the fuck out of there like John Dillinger or something. And he immediately gets recaptured. But this is his plan. Because he knows...
This is ridiculous.
Because he knows that if he was caught by the Thai authorities, remember he's in India, he could get the death sentence there because they had tried to charge him with 2 murders. So he got to sit in this Indian prison relatively comfortably for another 10 years safely until the statute of limitations had passed for those crimes in Thailand. And then he waltzed out of there in 1997. So,
it's kind of smart.
He's kind of brilliant.
It's genius. And there's this weird admiration as I'm reading this and reliving it. It's strange how it's a bad, weird feeling to feel like, that's so clever. Because it sounds like a movie, right? Like, it's just, it can't be real. But it is.
Yeah.
It's this. So I'm just about to get to some of the people that this affected. Here are just some of the victims we know about, and all of these took place in 1975. There's 3 people. Jenny Bolivar, who refused, they think, to become part of his schemes, so he drowned her in a tidal pool. And she was found wearing a bikini with flowers, which is where the bikini killer name comes from. Also in 1975, he murdered Vitaly Hakim, whom he beat, covered in accelerant, and lit on fire while he was still alive. And the last victim of that year was one of Hakim's friends, Charmaine Carew, who came looking for him. And she apparently asked too many questions. I don't know. She was also found wearing a bikini and was strangled so viciously the bones in her neck were shattered.
Oh my god.
Jeez.
Eventually, he got out of prison and he went off to France and got rich off a movie deal about his story. But in 2003, they finally arrested him again in Nepal for some Nepalese murder he committed. And he's still in prison, but they won't let him go to the prison hospital or have unsupervised visits. So what I found really poignant was there's this last quote from this article by Marusha Musafar on Aussie. She says, just last year, the then 72-year-old Sabraj petitioned a court in Kathmandu for release, claiming that new guidelines for elderly convicts mandate he be freed. Later that year, Sabraj underwent open heart surgery under full guard. The Nepalese surgeon who conducted the surgery tweeted that despite the devastation Sabraj had wrought on his victims, he has a heart and I just fixed valves inside.
Wow. I mean, that's bananas.
My god.
That's like, is there like a cult of personality around this guy?
I think so.
I feel like there has to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh
I mean, I don't
God.
know if this is... Look, he was born in 55, and we're still going, right? So...
Right!
I don't know if the feeling, the public feeling surrounding him is the same as it was back in the 80s.
Yeah.
And it depends on the country, too, but in France, apparently, he was just like this heartthrob to women.
Oh my God.
He married again.
Dog.
He married again while he was in prison.
Wow.
It's insane.
It's crazy. Yeah, it just... I mean, drugging the... throwing a party and drugging the guards. I mean...
It sounds like a legend. It sounds...
Yeah, it sounds
like,
fake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it happened.
I mean, that literally sounds like something that you would find in an old, like, slapstick comedy. Like a Three Stooges or something, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, getting arrested and then drugging the guards to get out.
As I was reading this, I was like, the scenes were just going through my mind. Like it was a film.
Right.
Just...
Right.
Yeah. A lot of that was from a video I found on YouTube because there were just so many crazy details that it had to be shrunk down. but I will post my sources on our blog.
Weird.
Yeah, that's insane.
That is really crazy.
You know what's more insane? Miranda's murder.
Oh no. My god.
Oh no. So we were all laughing there. That's gonna end pretty fast. Okay, so I am a Gemini. I was born June 3rd. And the whole time I was growing up, I was told everybody hates Geminis because Geminis are supposedly like two-faced and bitchy and gossipy and they can't be trusted and all that kind of stuff. But I feel like as I've gotten older, that opinion has changed a lot. And it's very confusing to me. But this website says, I don't really know a ton about Geminis, I guess, except for the fact that people think they're two-faced. But their strengths are being gentle, affectionate, curious, adaptable, and their ability to learn quickly and exchange ideas. And the weaknesses are their nervousness, their inconsistency, and their indecisiveness. Yeah, and then more negatives were superficial, lack the ability to make decisions, lack of direction, stuff like that. Which some of it I agree with and I can relate to, and others I can't. I'm pretty good at making decisions, but I'm pretty adaptable and stuff like that. So I don't know. Like I said, everybody's always told me that Geminis were two-faced, and I've just never understood that because I've never been that kind of person in my life. So I was like, okay, maybe I'm just not a Gemini. So there are actually a lot of Gemini serial killers. There are a lot to pick from, which is not something I am proud of. But it made it kind of easy to pick somebody for this. So I ended up picking Richard Chase, who was named the Vampire of Sacramento. And he was born May 23rd in 1950. This guy's a lot. I apologize if I talk forever because it's a lot. Like, it's a lot. Mm-hmm. So much stuff. So he's technically considered a spree killer, not a serial killer. But when Chase was a teenager, it basically, started out right away. He liked killing and mutilating animals and starting fires, which we all know right away. Those are red flags. And then as a young adult, his roommates would complain about the fact that he was high constantly, and he was always walking around naked, even if there were visitors around. And when they tried to force him to leave, he wouldn't do it, so they left. And he lived on his own. He tried to have multiple relationships with women, but it never worked out because he could not basically achieve any kind of sexual arousal with women, in any kind of typical heterosexual relationship. And a psychiatrist told him it was due to repressed rage or repressed mental illness, but we will find out later it's probably something else. So he moves in with his mother. He moves back in with his mother. And he accuses her of trying to poison him all the time. And so he gets kicked out of his home by his dad. So he gets another apartment and starts, disemboweling animals and eating the meat raw. He would even blend it up with, I think they said, some kind of pop, and then he would drink it like a shake. Yeah. He developed, he became a hypochondriac. And he started eating the animal meat because he believed if he didn't, his heart would shrink and disappear, and therefore kill him. So he was eventually admitted into a mental institution because he was injecting rabbit blood into his veins. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Who hasn't?
It's just something you do. He escaped and went back to his mom's home. And then they apprehended him and sent him to an institute for the criminally insane. And he shared fantasies with the nurses of killing rabbits. And then, while he was there, he achieved his nickname of Dracula because he captured, killed, and drank the blood of 2 birds from his window. And they found him with blood smeared on his mouth. So, That's kind of right out of Dracula, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Not really cool, but kind of, whoa. So they put him on antipsychotic meds, and he is released and deemed not a danger to society, even though he's telling all of these nurses his fantasies about killing rabbits and killing and drinking the blood of birds. And he's released into his mother's custody, and she decides he doesn't need his medication, so he stops taking his medication.
Off you go, Renfield. You're fine.
Then he moves out again, and he starts capturing, torturing, killing, and either eating or drinking the blood of various animals, even his neighbors' pets. He develops a fascination with firearms, and obviously eventually buys a gun. This one's interesting. He apparently once went to his mother's house and thrust a dead cat in her face, threw it to the ground, ripped its stomach open with his hands, and smeared the blood on his face and screamed. And I guess she just calmly stepped back inside. That's what my source said. I don't know if that's true. But if that's true, wow.
She has been in so much denial. Yeah.
Yeah. She has just fully given up. So, just picturing that in my mind, it feels like something you'd see, like we were just talking about with yours, Nikki, like something you'd see in a movie. Like some weird horror movie. Like someone just like drinking the blood out of a cat's body and then screaming at you at your front door. I don't know.
Definitely. Or even like a horror, or even like I could see where it could be like kind of a black comedy, right?
Yeah.
With like the other person just like slowly backing away.
Yes.
Like, sometimes I feel like we have to laugh about this stuff because otherwise it's way too depressing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to laugh my way through it. So, on August 3rd of 1977, an officer discovers Richard Chase's vehicle lodged in a sand drift. And then he discovers Chase covered in blood, naked, and screaming in the sand. He tells the officer that the blood is his and that it leaked out of his skin.
Okay.
Yep. And then December 27th, he fires into a woman's home, fires his weapon into a woman's home, and no one's hurt. And then 2 days later, on the 29th, he shoots Ambrose Griffin on the side of the road. I believe he was bringing groceries in with his family. And officers discover that the shot that killed Ambrose Griffin came from the same gun as the one fired into the woman's home 2 days prior. So then January 11th, 1978, Chase asks his neighbor for a cigarette and restrains her until she gives him the entire pack. And then 10 days later, he starts walking around his neighborhood looking for unlocked doors. He eventually, while he was in prison, ended up telling cops that he took locked doors as a sign that he wasn't welcome, and unlocked doors meant that he was welcome to come inside. So he gets into one house and he steals the valuables. He urinates into a drawer of an infant's clothes and defecates on a child's bed.
What the fuck?
Yeah, and then the couple finds him in the home, and the husband attacks him, but Richard Chase escapes. And then, I believe in the same day, it was a little confusing on my sources, he comes across David and Teresa Wallen's home. So Teresa, who's 3 months pregnant, was home. Her husband was at work, and she left the door unlocked when taking the garbage outside. This is when it gets really bad. Just a warning. So Chase snuck in and shot her 3 times, once in the hand, probably as like a defense, and then twice in the head. He then raped her post-mortem while stabbing her with a butcher's knife. He opened her stomach and took out her organs while filling a bucket with blood to bathe in. He sliced off her nipple and drank blood, that he basically collected it with a glass and then drank it out of the glass. And then he retrieved dog feces from the yard and stuffed it down her throat. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. And it gets worse, so I apologize, everybody. January 23rd, 1978, he buys 2 puppies from a neighbor, and he kills them and drinks their blood and leaves their bodies on the neighbor's doorstep. Yep. All right, and then January 27th, 1978, this one's a mass murder, and it was his final murder. Richard Chase enters the home of Evelyn Miroth. He shot and killed Dan Meredith, a neighbor who had come to the home to check on Evelyn. He then shot Evelyn's 6-year-old son, Jason, as he attempted to run to his mother's room. On the way to kill Jason, he shoots David, who was Evelyn's 22-month-old nephew. He then enters Evelyn's bedroom and shoots her in the head. He then pulled her body onto the bed and simultaneously raped her body while drinking blood from slices in her back and neck. I'm just not going to read this next part because it's not necessary and it's terrible. He stabbed her body nearly a dozen times in her anus, and the knife even penetrated her uterus. He also stabbed her. Yeah, he also stabbed her in other vital areas of the body, and blood ended up pooling in her abdomen, which he drained and drank. He then dragged David's body into the tub, cut open his skull, and ate some of the brain matter. A little girl ended up knocking at the door for a play date with Jason, Evelyn's son, and Richard Chase fled in Dan Meredith's car, and the little girl alerted the neighbors.
Thank God.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the police discovered Chase had left perfect handprints and footprints behind in Evelyn's blood. So Richard Chase had taken David's body. He was the 22-month-old. This is so messed up. He cut off his penis and used it as a straw to drink the blood. He ate several of the organs and made some of them into smoothies, and then he dumped the body at a church. So FBI agents Russ Vorpagel and Robert Ressler created a profile for the murders, and Nancy Holden, a woman who Richard Chase had attempted to receive a ride from, suggested him, and she did not give him a ride anywhere because she thought he basically looked terrifying. He was a scary looking guy. Sorry. The agents ran a background check and found out that he owned a .22 caliber gun, which matched, basically all the crime scenes. So they went to his apartment and he wouldn't let them in. And they hid down the hall and eventually arrested him while he was carrying a blood-stained box, which contained the gun covered in blood and it contained bloody wallpaper. I don't know where the wallpaper came from.
He must have cut it off the wall to hide evidence.
Yeah,
but
I don't know.
Forget that.
But
you get some luminol in that place, you could have a disco. Jesus.
Right. He insists to the officers that the blood is from dogs he'd killed, which is still illegal, by the way.
Lame, dude.
Yeah. And then the officers search him and they find Dan Meredith's wallet on him. And they finally search his apartment. So basically everything was soaked in blood. The walls, the floors, the ceiling, the fridge, and his eating utensils. His blender was sitting on the counter with coagulated blood and rotting organ matter inside from when he was making his smoothies. When they opened the fridge, they found animal parts wrapped in tinfoil, David's brains in a Tupperware container, and pieces of his body wrapped in saran wrap, and several internal organs from Teresa Wallen and Evelyn Miroth. He had pet collars on his counter and diagrams of human biology on the kitchen table. So in 1979, Chase faces 6 counts of murder. Defense tries to argue for second-degree murder to avoid the death penalty, citing his past with mental illness. And May 8th, 1979, Chase is convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder, and he is sentenced to death in a gas chamber. He was not found legally insane. So, in prison, everybody was terrified of him, and his inmates constantly tried to convince him to commit suicide because they were too scared to get close enough to kill him themselves. He was eventually granted an interview with Robert Ressler, And he tells him that he committed the first murder because his mother wouldn't let him visit for Christmas. He explained to the police dish soap poisoning, which he said was if you lift the soap, like in a, I don't know, you set like a bar of soap on a little plate thing. If you lift it up and it's dry, you're fine. But if it's gooey, you've been poisoned and your blood will turn to powder. The powder depletes the body and drains energy, which is why he was drinking blood. He told the police that he was Jewish, but he wasn't. And he had been persecuted by Nazis. He believed the Nazis were connected to UFOs, which the UFOs told him to kill and drink blood. He believed the UFOs followed him and that the FBI should be able to track them. And then, Nikki, this is where you got the mac and cheese. It wasn't when they apprehended him. He then, during the interview, grabbed handfuls of mac and cheese he'd been hoarding in his pockets, and he thrust them at Ressler and requested it be analyzed for poison because he thought the prison guards were in league with the Nazis and wanted to kill him. And then he also asked Ressler for a radar gun so he could catch the UFOs and put the Nazis on trial. On December 26th, 1980, he is found dead of an overdose. He had hoarded the antidepressants and anti-hallucinogens given to him in prison, and he committed suicide. And the coroner said his heart was normal, even though he insisted that it wasn't, and said that's why he did everything he did. In 1988, a movie called Rampage was released. It's a crime drama based on his story. And then another film in 1992 called Unspeakable is also based on him. There's also Robert Ressler discusses the interview he had with him in a book called Whoever Fights Monsters. Yeah. And I guess the FBI still uses his file as a model for the unorganized killer.
I basically spent that whole time trying to hold down vomit.
Me too.
I ate before we did this.
Me too. Oh no. It's the worst thing I've read, I think.
That is the worst thing I've ever heard in my life. And I had heard of this guy, but I guess, like, it didn't, like, the gory details did not, I conveniently forgot them. Which I will probably do again after this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just feel like maybe this guy will be in season 2 of Mindhunter. That's all I have to say. He would be a good choice.
Oh, God.
Because Robert Ressler is one of the main characters in Mindhunter.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, it's based on his book.
Okay.
In my mind, the mac and cheese thing was funny when I talked to you about it earlier, but when you were saying it in context of the story, it was the least funny thing I'd ever heard.
Yeah, no, it's not funny anymore.
Yeah. It's intense. It's a lot. I mean, you hear stories about people, like, drinking some blood. You know, you hear about it. It's infrequent, but you hear about it. But this is a lot. Which is literally what I said to you guys after I started reading about him. This is just a lot. Mm. It's a lot of things all together.
We definitely shouldn't have ended on that one.
No. No.
We should have to get it out of my head.
We should have put mine in the middle and ended with yours, Nikki, because we laughed through yours.
Yours was yours was about a murderer, but, like, you know, it was kind of fun.
Jaren, can you switch it around?
Oh, God. I feel like he did everything in the book that's messed up.
Did they ever diagnose him with anything?
Paranoid schizophrenia.
I mean, clearly.
Yeah, but...
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, I feel like there were... No, because, I mean, I know people who have schizophrenia, and they're not violent people.
No.
Jesus. What the fuck?
Yeah. The whole UFO and Nazi thing is very strange.
I wonder
it doesn't
if that
feel
was
like
real.
It fits. It almost feel like it doesn't fit.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost wonder if he actually believed that or not.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, obviously there was something wrong with him. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I can't even... I don't want to think about it anymore to try and analyze it, frankly.
Sorry, guys.
Yep. Jesus, that was horrible. That was worse than that one guy I did whose name I can't remember.
That was way worse than Albert Fish.
Yes, Albert Fish. That was worse.
Honestly, after you did Albert Fish, I was like, I don't think I could ever read anything that could make me more sick than this.
Well,
I was very wrong.
Has anyone watched any good movies lately?
Well, okay, not good, but I did see the new Hulu movie. The Treehouse.
Did you
bad?
See it? Mm-mm. No.
It wasn't terrible.
Oh, no.
I feel like the main character was supposed to be Gordon Ramsay.
Uh-huh.
And the guy in the movie was accused of doing some very terrible things. But, like, the guy's a 1-to-1 comparison with Gordon Ramsay. Like, his daughter makes jokes about his floppy hair and how angry he is all the time in the kitchen, and he's like a reality TV star chef too. And it's just really bizarre that they chose to go that way, because if I were Gordon Ramsay, I might be a little angry. I mean, angrier than usual about that. Mm-hmm. But the movie was like really cheesy. It was like one of those into the dark things. And it had a good twist at the end. I wasn't sure I liked where it was going, but at the end I ended up liking it. I can't stop thinking about the murder thing.
Oh no.
Just can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, well, I've been watching Star Trek Discovery, so that's not horror. But it is very good. And Spock is really hot, and he has a beard.
Oh, no.
For some reason, but, like, I'm so into it. He's, like, emo. Hot Spock. No, it's great.
Oh.
No, it's so good.
Oh, God.
It's really good. You should watch it. Well, I watched it on my Fire Stick, but it's on CBS's streaming thing, but that's not horror.
About it. Yeah.
I don't know if I have seen any horror movies lately.
Well, this isn't really horror, but you guys might be interested in it. I started watching a show on Netflix called The Good Place.
Oh, yeah.
And it's amazing.
My God, The Good Place!
I love that show.
I love it.
It's so good. I haven't finished the second season yet, but it's amazing. Have you guys read No Exit by Jean-Paul Sartre?
Mm-mm.
Unfortunately, yeah.
No? It is basically No Exit. I'm not even kidding you. No Exit is where the quote, hell is other people comes from.
Yeah.
It's like my favorite play ever. You guys should read it.
Oh, I hate it.
Wait, I thought you said you hadn't read it.
No, I said I haven't. I didn't like it. I think Nikki said she hadn't.
No. Oh. Why don't you like it?
I just don't. I just didn't like it. I don't even remember. All I remember is that I read it in college and I did not enjoy it, and I felt like it was a slog to get through. But
I loved it.
I do like that quote, and I love The Good Place. So there you go.
Yes.
The Good Place is really good.
It's a great
show.
show.
If you guys need something happy to watch after this episode, watch The Good Place.
Yes, it's an amazing show.
Very funny.
Yeah. And also, Gerard Way's new show is weird.
Oh yeah, I've heard that it's good.
I only watched the first episode of it so far, but it's good, but it's really fucking weird.
Yep. And another good but strange movie that I could recommend to people would be The Favorite. I don't know if it's streaming anywhere, but it just won a couple Oscars.
I heard it was so good.
It's so good, you guys. Like, it's so good. And it's, like, funny, but it's, like, fucked up. But it's amazing. It's, you guys, everyone should watch it. That's another really good one. If you're looking for just, like, a movie about women that's, like, totally fucked up, ignore the reviews on Amazon because people are fucking stupid. This movie's so great. Because I try and watch all the Oscar-nominated movies for the Oscars because I care. And so that's why I watched it. And it was amazing. It was amazing.
Awesome.
I can't believe the bullshit racist Green Book won Best Picture, but that's a discussion for another day.
Oh my god, I can't wait for Jaren to hear you say that. Because we just had a conversation last night about how, like, she saw it and she really liked it. And I was like, oh my god, everybody was so pissed that it won.
Jaren, I'm sorry. No. You couldn't see me, but, I did a little dance to make it so I wasn't trying to be, critical. But, no. Oh, God. It was fucking racist. Not intentionally, I don't think. I don't think it was intentionally racist. But it was Driving Miss Daisy, but the opposite. What if the driver was the horrible racist, and this noble black man has to teach him that maybe, black people are not so bad? Instead of it being what if this old lady was a racist, and her noble black driver has to teach her that maybe black people aren't so bad? It was, oh no, Sharon.
I heard it was basically just a white savior movie.
It sure is. And it's supposed to, the black guy in it is Don Shirley, who's one of the greatest classical pianists of all time. And his life story has been reduced to actually being about his driver, and he's also in it being driven around. Oh, God. And when they won Best Picture, they didn't even thank Don Shirley.
Really?
Yes. Oh, I was so mad I turned it off. Claire and I were texting, outraged. So don't watch Green Book, but watch all the other ones.
Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter at QOTD Podcast, on Facebook at facebook.com/QOTD Podcast, Tumblr at queensofthedamnpodcast.tumblr.com, and YouTube at Queens of the Damn Podcast.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and TuneIn Radio. You can also follow us on our blog, queensofthedamnpodcast.wordpress.com, to find bonus content and extra information on our episodes.
If you would like to donate to our show, you can find us at patreon.com/QOTD podcast, where you can receive special perks as a listener for becoming a monthly patron. If you would like to make a one-time donation, you can send it to QOTDpodcast@gmail.com on PayPal. We'll see you next week.